Her name is Lucy Steigerwald. She's a contributing editor at antiwar.com, and today she will be speaking about the horrors of war. Everyone, welcome Lucy. Woo!
I appreciate it.
All right. Following Walter Block is never a good thing, but we can do this. All right, I'm here to tell you guys about how war is bad. It's the most basic premise that I can find beyond, as Jeffrey Tucker said earlier to me, liberty is good, but I think we need to hear it a million times over. Block just talked about sort of the big tent of liberty. You don't need to be a libertarian to be concerned with individual rights, or a radical, or whatever word you choose, civil liberties focused. You know, most of us love people like Glenn Greenwald, who are completely unlibertarian on economics, anarcho-capitalists, regular anarchists, voluntarists, whatever Ron Paul is. You know, there's lots of good stuff. The big tent should be a big train. We all get on board, work together to get somewhere a little bit more free. The speech isn't a lecture, but it's a little bit of a scolding that libertarians are supposed to be consistent even if there isn't a litmus test. And they don't always, particularly when it comes to war. Everything we as libertarians, and let's add the etc., so I don't have to give you the laundry list of beliefs, everything we as libertarians object to invariably happens in modern war. Sometimes we object when they're beginning, when they go on and on and on. Sometimes not. We tend to forget about war the way the rest of the world, the rest of the country does, because it's not really affecting us. And war is seen, you know, like with abortion or borders, there's this debate within libertarianism. People fall on different sides, they pick and choose. And you probably don't believe the state when it says it is the only person who can deliver the mail, when it says that weed caused black men to rape white women and must be banned. You don't believe that there's an exception to the rule that says don't throw people in prison for consensual activities, or that markets should be free. And so you shouldn't believe in the magical incantation that says war is okay. War is this fine print on all the individualist principles that we treasure. And the fine print says, yeah, this time propaganda, collectivism, property destruction, prison, disease, and death doesn't count. It was a war, you see. But that's just a word, an idea, and it always does count to the dead, and it counts to the survivors. Libertarians do know this on some days. We forget along with the country on some days. On days when we get scared. Or we get too sensible. We advocate for more constitutional safeguards. The War Powers Resolution. Congress, not the President, shall declare war. These are mere roadblocks. We can certainly use them as much as possible. We should not confuse them with moral or even particularly practical arguments. Being completely anti-war should be a fundamental tenet of libertarianism, and it isn't. We, sorry to use that word, have fallen down on the job time and time again, and we never seem to prioritize the one government action that contains so many multitudes of badness. There's this idea that there's just war theory, there's a good war. Some wars are certainly worse than others, but there may not be such thing as a good or just war with modern technology. The irreversibility of war is all you need to know about it. All government mistakes are difficult to fix. Time, money can be given back, time can't be, time in prison. The one thing you really can't rectify is, of course, death. It's top of the list in terms of no backsies. Sometimes if I argue this, I usually get the query, what's the matter, do you believe in self-defense? This is often from conservatives. This is basic wrong-headed thinking. It comes usually from people who assume that if you're against war, you are some kind of suicidally pacifistic hippie who wouldn't stop a burglar/murderer from breaking into your house and killing your whole family. Self-defense does not translate to a national scale, just like everything else. That's why we're here, that's why we're libertarians. The idea that I may directly protect myself against attack or even protect my family and property does not translate to a nation state may attack another nation state. It doesn't translate because you and I do not have the moral right to kill other people for some cause, even if it's a good cause. The US did not get to decide, morally speaking, that the citizens of Hiroshima or Nagasaki had forfeit lives because they were in the middle of our war with their government. Or consider the Iraq War, the never-ending one. Saddam Hussein, a dictator murderer, couldn't be trusted. He wasn't terribly cooperative about weapons inspectors. He might have had a leg to stand on about his nation being bombed every 5 minutes by the West, but he was also a homicidal tyrant. The US invaded, yes, it was an invasion, and based on mostly basis fear that Hussein was a threat to the rest of the world. And this invasion was not defending your house from a break-in. This was burning down your neighbor's house because he once beat his wife and he might someday kick your dog. And if the whole block burns down, whoops, that makes you go Philly PD probably. Regardless, you have not engaged in self-defense. You have not simply defended your person. Your nation state is the aggressor. You are the bad guys, even if the other side is bad too, even if they are worse, whatever that means. During the Good War, World War II, the Allies killed more than 1 million people in strategic bombings, including some 200,000 with nuclear bombs. More habits of the good guys in the Good War. Concentration camps for 100,000 Japanese American citizens, newspapers cowed, an official office of censorship. The whole country during World War II pitched in, economically, socially. This is charming somehow in Turner Classic Movies, and it is terrifying in retrospect. There are more things I could list that people don't even remember. Operation Keel Haul, where millions of prisoners and refugees were sent back to Joseph Stalin. Obviously, half of Europe was given to Stalin, who, as soon as Hitler was vanquished, became the worst guy in the world who had to be fought. Fundamentally, the question is, if you care about individuals, why does hitting just under the high water mark of evil put there by Hitler, or say ISIS, let you off the hook for anything that you do? The Allies were good because the Allies were against Hitler. The transformation of the US into a light fascist state was justified because Hitler was Hitler. How much of this was self-defense? How much worse were the Allies allowed to be before they became unacceptably bad? Conservatives, hawks, etc. say either, gee, well, it was Hitler, or they say, worse, that it doesn't matter at all. Because once the US has an enemy, they can and must do whatever they can to win out over them. This is the most collectivist attitude in existence. That any evil is justified because it is done under the banner of a nation. Well, this nation, because we are exceptional after all. To confuse self-defense with war is to equate the individual with the nation-state in the most fundamental way. Amazing people like Randolph Bourne, who was a progressive, but who cares, noted this when he said, war is the health of the state. War is indeed pure collectivism. It is antithetical to the whole libertarian belief system. And there are other fallacies, such as victims of war are not innocent victims because they live under and have therefore implicitly accepted the totalitarian or warmongering government under which they live. This is more collectivism. It is, however, mysteriously a type subscribed to by the neocons and a special loudmouth type of objectivist. It should be very patently obvious that people in foreign countries, especially those who live under a dictator like Hussein, have not agreed to him and are as innocent as any other civilian. You and I have not yet stormed Washington, D.C. with torches. Does that mean we endorse everything happening in the Pentagon or the DEA? The next difficulty is that war is necessary this time. I would argue that libertarians fall into this trap most of all. But the thing is, every war is going to be necessary, deemed necessary by its sellers. And there is always, because the world is imperfect, a tyrant somewhere and a humanitarian horror elsewhere that cries out for doing something. Now we have all those lovely humanitarian drones, and a desperate need to do something in Syria. Should we fund both sides, perhaps? That's what we've been doing. We have tried everything, as I say, including fund both sides, except letting in more than a handful of Syrian refugees, because when the US breaks it doesn't need to buy it. A humanitarian outrage can provoke what liberals often like, which is, let's do a humanitarian intervention. Of course, the Iraq War was sold as such, but liberals objected then. But back to the World War II, which I know enough about to give grim examples, and I know enough that most people think, well, Hitler, shit, I guess we had to do it. Saving the Jews is sort of seen vaguely as the goal of World War II once we knew about the Holocaust. But during the war, the US government accepted fewer Jewish refugees than the immigration quotas allowed. 10% fewer by one estimate. But as soon as the camps were liberated, the war was sort of retconned. They had saved the Jews. Arguably the most worthwhile thing Franklin Roosevelt's government did was help fund the War Refugee Board, which helped fund the heroic diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who actually saved Jews in Budapest, Germany. Meanwhile, the entire US managed to admit only 132,000 Jews from anywhere between 1933 and 1945. Most of the world had vague plans to do something about them, in Alaska perhaps, but they never got around to it. It was the bystander effect on a worldwide scale. Some people saved the day. FDR also, the US also refused to let in 20,000 Jewish children. They famously didn't let the passengers on the St. Louis ship disembark here in New York, and they had to go back to Europe. You have Raoul Wallenberg, Oskar Schindler, people who did save Jews, but we only remember the war heroes, and we go back to, we had to bomb. We had to bomb Dresden, Hiroshima, Berlin. We had to bomb them absolutely into powder because the other side was doing it, because the other side was worse, because Hitler had to be stopped. A CIA-style assassination of leaders has also gone horribly over the years, but hell, go shoot Hitler. Do something instead of bomb every city. There's no libertarian argument except the coldest type of pragmatism that makes it okay to do what the US did during World War II. I feel like with this audience I don't need to add the caveat that Hitler was very bad and it's good that he's dead, and a world under Hitler would have been worse than the one we have. But that doesn't really end the issue for me. And of course, the arrogance of intervention is very clear. Not just about American exceptionalism, but central planning. Conservatives have this amazing idea that the moment you leave the boundaries of your country, the impossibility of central planning goes away. If they Google a country on the way to go bomb it, they think that their master plan for taking it over and rebuilding it will somehow go just as they predicted.
On Facebook,
something like 1 million Iraqis died to the US-led invasion. There was a policy in the initial stages of the war called de-Baathification, which basically said, fire everybody with the slightest affiliation with Saddam Hussein's party, which turns out to also have been the people who knew how to make the country run, the infrastructure. It led immediately to scores of thousands of men who were disaffected and had no jobs. And it just, it handed over a civil war. And it seems so obvious that this plan would backfire horribly, but if you're centrally planning a foreign government, it'll work just fine. These mistakes are repeated so often that they start to feel like they're on purpose, which in my opinion is how conspiracy theories are born. I mean, a liberal says, we need gun control, let's pass this new law. And they're saying, everything will happen just as I wish. The guns will go away, the gun violence will stop, everything will be fine. Conservative might say, build that wall, right? Trump, Trump, Trumpity Trump. And all the illegal immigrants will never try to come in. We'll control the market for labor, which doesn't sound like a free market to me. Both sides, on their pet issues, presume that the end result of their intervention will have no unforeseen consequences. These are basic libertarian lessons, and we don't apply them enough to war, because war has both the worst violations and the worst fallacies, all of the greatest failings that government has to offer. One of my favorite examples, I'm going to offer another one, is the Strategic Hamlet Program, which was in the initial stages of the Vietnam War. You've maybe heard Hearts and Minds, winning Hearts and Minds. The Americans wanted to do that in South Vietnam. Part of that was moving 2 million South Vietnamese peasants out of their ancestral villages and forcing them to relocate, and then sit around being puzzled when some of these villagers were high Viet Cong soldiers in the basement or what have you. The government is so arrogant that it moved 2 million people and expected them to think America and not to go, well, hell, maybe I'll support the other side after all. This is what happens when you don't consider people in foreign countries to be quite as human as you are. And I think almost all of us are a little bit guilty of that. And libertarians, most of all, need to check that. Pardon me. I'm redundant in my ranting a bit. One of the other great critics of war is, of course, Robert Higgs, who wrote Crisis and Leviathan. His neat little summation of what happens with war and any other crisis, but war being the biggest crisis usually a nation faces, is the ratchet effect, which is government power increases in every area, and once the crisis is over, it decreases, but not to the level that it was before. That's how you get the building up of powers. You get spying powers. And Higgs wrote that book before the War on Terror, which is much more blatant in its, well, I guess this is never-ending convenience.
Dead bastard.
I mean, the War on Terror, to sum it up, has given us a huge spying program, millions dead around the globe. It doesn't seem like going away. Obama is an improvement over George W. Bush, and he still has set this precedent that American citizens can be killed by drones without oversight. We are going to regret that very soon. Why would we ever, as libertarians, etc., want to give the state that much power? But there's this let's not be unreasonable. Let's accept that sometimes we need to nuke a city full of children to get something done. Otherwise, we'd be idealistic dreamers. War is the health of the state, though, and as libertarians, we need to stop letting the state cheat on its diet, letting it gulp up property, civil liberties, and lives. And in closing, well, what the hell do we do about this? And the really depressing part is, I don't know. For someone who writes for antiwar.com as much as possible, I'm a bit of a pessimist. I remember when we almost had an invasion of Syria 3 or 4 years ago. I had this distinctive feeling of a deer in the headlights. This horrible feeling they're going to do it again. It's going to be another country. And if they want to invade, they're going to. And what the hell can I do about it? I wrote for antiwar.com and I was that pessimistic. It doesn't bode well. And strangely, that was the one conflict that did get halted. Mostly. So what we should do is sort of the childish, earnest, raise awareness, talk about it. Most of all, prioritize war. It's not low on the list. I'm not saying markets are important.